This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host, Dr. Heidi Horsley. Well, good morning from California, Heidi.
Good morning. Good afternoon from New York, I should say. Bob is seriously one of my all-time favorite people. He is a very generative and giving person. He's been doing workshops for Compassionate Friends for many years, and people absolutely love what he says and how he says it. He's extremely genuine, and he is a psychology instructor at Highline Community College in Washington State, where he teaches courses in psychology and death education. Like I said, he's a much sought-after speaker. He's written 7 books, many articles, and he is right now finishing a video, and it's called Men and Their Grief 20 Years Later. Welcome, Bob Baugher.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words. Wow. Gloria contacted me a couple months ago and said, hey, how about talking about men and grief again? So,
what about men and grief? Do they grieve differently than women?
Well, I think the first thing is that, you know, as humans, we're more similar to each other, men and women, than we are different. And so, as everything, there's a lot of overlap. But there are certain issues that certainly come up with men. And yeah, you're right, Heidi. We're just on the verge, hopefully, this summer of releasing this video called Men and Grief 20 Years Later, because we originally did the video in 1992, talking to 8 men. I moderated it about their issues relating to grief and loss, the loss of a child, loss of a sibling, a parent, a wife, and so on. And so now we were able to track 6 of these 8 guys up 20 years later, and so we're talking to them about, you know, what helped, what didn't, and so on. So we're very excited about
that. Is amazing, Bob. So you've gotten a hold of, 6 of the original, and you were talking to them 20 years later so that they can talk to you about what their journey has looked like over time.
Exactly.
Fabulous.
Yeah, one of them died, and one of them lives in Arizona, and the other ones we were able to round up and the video, and they're editing it now and should have it done in a few months. But you know, the issues are you know, similar to women in some ways, and yet different. And you know, as we well know, and so I'm going to say the general stereotype that we expect men to do 2 things, you know, that are sort of paradoxical. One is that we expect them to be tough and macho and all that kind of stuff, and then the other one, we expect them to be sensitive and caring and open and so on. And so I think men have a special challenge as they deal with the loss of a loved one to, you know, how much do I cry and show what I'm really feeling, and how much do I, you know, sort of suppress that and put that away. And yeah, there have been some good books written, you know, about that. You mentioned Hippel's book, and you know, there's the original one called Men and Grief by Carol Stoddicker, and you know, her issues around looking at men for the first time in ways that people really didn't think about before. Let's launch into a couple things. One is that from an anatomical standpoint, women, you know, somehow have easier access to talk about, you know, what they feel. Don't ask a man necessarily, how do you feel about that, or, you know, what emotions are coming up for you, but it's more of, so what's going on in your body? Important to say to him, what's going on in your stomach, you know, and him to be able to say, I don't know, my stomach feels like it feels empty, you know, what's going on in your heart? Oh, I feel like my heart's just being squeezed, and so what do you think's going on there? I don't know, like a choking feeling, like anxiety, like something else is going to happen. And so sometimes just sort of focusing in on bodily sensations. Sometimes when people are talking about something that's very difficult and their physiology begins heating up, they are in some degree of pain. So it looks like walking away or closing down is just their brain's way of protecting themselves at that moment. And so, you know, you get, you know, a wife saying, you know, he won't talk about our daughter, or, you know, a sister dies and other brother, you know, the other sister says, how come my brother doesn't talk about our sister? I can't understand. And part of it is we need to understand that this person is in some degree of pain, and that they need some time to, you know, and a way to approach that. And I think the more we can appreciate that, you know, the better. So, and the interesting research on, you know, Doka and Martin and their look at what's called intuitive grief versus instrumental grief. And, intuitive means that people are in touch with their emotions and are talking about it and getting it out and, sharing it and going to groups and so on, where instrumental grief was more doing things and, whether it's planting a tree or building something or working on some project that maybe at some level in the name of their loved one who died, we've more often seen men doing that.
I have a pressing question for you. Was there anything that surprised you in interviewing these men 20 years later?
I think how it didn't take much at all. I think what just came up again was 20 years later, here's a man talking about the death of his 9-year-old daughter, and he's tearing up. Okay? And what that says is, guess what? It doesn't go away. We never get to zero in our grief. And I think that's the power of this upcoming video is that, yes, whether you like it or not, you moved on. And one of the ways you move on when someone dies, as we all know, is you get up the next day whether you like it or not. And you go through the day, and suddenly that's one day, and then it's another day, then it's a week, then it's 2 weeks, then it's a month, then it's a year. And it's like, my God, how did this happen? And now for these men, it's more than 20 years. And yet, when we sat down and I asked them the questions, they were right back there again, just experiencing those same emotions. And so it shows you that it doesn't go away.
One other thing I really wanted to ask you, Bob, is what helps guys? What helps guys in the grief process find hope again?
So I think the first thing is to educate them and help them to understand that here are all these ways that your grief can come out, and you are in a crazy world that you've never experienced before, and to know more about here's what the craziness is. You're going to feel this. People are going to say that. They're going to try to lay cliches on you. They're going to try to hope that you're better when you're really not. You're going to say what's wrong with me. So, of course, as an educator myself, that's always the first place to go is little booklets, pamphlets, movies, the radio show, and so on that are going to help people understand this is what grief is all about.
Now, tell people, you have written so many nice small booklets and things that people can get. Tell people where to get them.
They can get them by emailing me at B for Bob _K Baugher, BAUGHER at yahoo.com. B _K Baugher at yahoo.com. The first book I wrote 20 years ago, which is now sold, if you can believe this, because I self-published, sold more than 50,000 books. A Guide for the Bereaved Survivor, and that's the Grief 101 book. You open a teeny page, and on one page, one side of the page it has guilt, the other side it has suggestions. How did I write these books? From people who gave me input, people from compassionate friends and widowed people who said, here's what I experienced, here's what helped me, here's what did. And I wrote a book on guilt during bereavement, and another one on anger. I got together with Gary Hankins, who's an expert on anger, and his wife Carol, and we co-authored a book on anger during bereavement, and then I wrote one on homicide with a man whose daughter was murdered years ago, and he heads a victim services group, and he wrote it. And then with Jack Jordan, I did the After Suicide Loss book, and so on. So, and I did one on crying as well. And all that was sort of handed to me like, hey, maybe you should write a book, and so I did.
Awesome. Hey, well, listen, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been...
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.